Hola a todos. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. Woo!
Woo! Yay!
I'm so excited to be here today with all of you. I am Karla Valenti. I am moderating a very exciting panel, Gods and Monsters. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping items. Number one, please read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box. Number two, don't forget to subscribe to the Latinx Kidlit Book Festival YouTube channel. Number three, if you are a school, classroom, librarian, or educator who is joining us, our school visit fund is back. Enter to win a free visit from a Latinx author or illustrator. All the details are in the chat, so go ahead and take a look at that. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our three panelists today. We have Jorge Aguirre, Brigid Martin, and Kaela Rivera. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, and why don't we kick it off with Kaela?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I always love this fantastic festival, and to be in this light with everyone here is so cool. So I am Kaela Rivera. I grew up in Tennessee. I'm Latina, obviously. I'm half Mexican. My papa was. And I am the author of the Cece Rios series. You can see it's shining in the back here, over here, and a giant face on the other side, which is my characters and a cardboard cutout, because that's just fun. And I thought, why not? This is the book that came out in the Cece Rios series this year. So I'm so excited to chat, because if there's anything I love, it's monsters and criaturas.
Kaela, tell us a little bit about Cece Rios. What is the plot, or what is it that you want people to know about it?
Yes. Okay. So the first, it's a trilogy. The first book kicks off about a 12-year-old girl who has to become a bruja in order to rescue her older sister, who gets kidnapped by El Sombreron, the bride stealer. She goes on this crazy adventure, meets a bunch of shapeshifters, and has to fight against her own people's prejudices and biases in order to reclaim her familia.
Awesome. All right. Who wants to go next?
Sure, I'll go. I'm Jorge Aguirre. I am a Colombian American from Columbus, Ohio, and I write kids animation, but I also write books like these, like Call Me Iggy and Monster Locker, which we'll be talking more about later. And I did Monster Locker with a Mexican American friend of mine, and Call Me Iggy with a Puerto Rican friend of mine. I do graphic novels. They're both graphic novels.
Awesome. What about you, Brigid?
Hi, yes, I'm Brigid Martin. So nice to be here on this panel with everybody. I come from New York. I'm a New York-based writer, and I have the book series Totally Psychic. I love the show and tell everyone's doing already, coming prepared with their books in hand. And Totally Psychic is about a Cuban-American tween medium who could talk to ghosts. She's not very good at it, so she makes a ton of mistakes along the way, such as accidentally opening up a spirit portal in the middle of her school, unleashing hundreds of ghosts upon her classmates, and has to figure out a way to get them back. And yeah, I'm happy to be on this panel with everybody.
Thank you for that. And quickly, I'll introduce myself. I'm Karla Valenti. I'm the author of Lola, which is backwards, but you can see Lola. And Lola is a magical realist quest featuring a young girl named Lola who seeks out to save her brother Alex from a mysterious darkness that is hunting him. And when Alex starts to turn into stone, she realizes that she has to go into a hidden kingdom to find a cure. But the book and Lola and readers will discover that things are not what they seem. This book is full of unexpected twists and turns. It's a magical realist and fantasy adventure. So thank you guys for being here today. Real excited to talk about monsters. So my first question to kick it off is to Kaela. Can you share a monster from your past, or from your youth, or from your present, wherever?
From my life.
From your life, right?
Yes. Okay. So they've got like a few, but I'll just like do really quick highlights. So when I was younger, I don't know why my dad did this, but he made up the story of the Vovolo, and he would say it like that too. the abuelo. And like, as I got older, like he'd be like, it's going to come for you. And especially when we were in Spain once, it was lovely. You know, we were going through walks and he's like, yeah, the abuelo, this is his stomping ground. So he's going to
Oh my
fight.
gosh.
You know, what is it? And he wouldn't even tell me what it was, you know. It's just coming for you. But he would describe little things that it did. And when I got older, I was like, that's just a chupacabra. He just renamed it. So I wouldn't know what it was. But yeah, so that was one that we grew up with. It was just a silly one. But when I was older, my abuelo, I had this wonderful opportunity to visit my abuelo where he lived growing up. You know, we were kind of basically on opposite sides of the United States growing up. So it took a lot of effort to go and visit him. But I had the opportunity and he told me all these beautiful stories about growing up in Mexico and about my bisabuelo, who I'd never gotten to meet, and how he would have the journeys he'd have to take between cerros and montañas and stuff like that on his burro. And he told this fantastic story about how La Llorona, there was a river between one that took him all night to take this trail, and you'd by the river the whole time, and he could see La Llorona like tracking him.
Oh my gosh, that gives me chills.
Yes, it was so spooky. And he tells this whole story, and I'm sitting there like clenched up listening to the whole story. I was like, what happened? How did he get away? And he's like, oh, he realized it wasn't La Llorona, it was the string on his hat.
Oh my gosh.
Like, I was like, but for that reason, our family feels close to La Llorona because we're like, you know, she stalked bisabuelo once, you know.
That's how legends are made, right? That's the best ghost stories are really the string in the hat that we didn't know was really a string in the hat.
They're all strings in the hat sometimes.
Exactly,
you know?
exactly. Jorge, what about you?
Well, I'm gonna jump on what Kaela said because my monster from my youth was also inspired by a story that had a lot of plot holes when I think about it as an adult that my papi would tell me as a kid, which was that my abuelito was a cop in Colombia and everybody was scared of this witch. Nobody would go confront the witch, and turned out the witch was just a tree, like in the dark.
Yeah.
There's a few plot holes with that, like why did they look in the daytime? Why did they? But I didn't think of that as a child. But I was cursed or blessed with a vivid imagination when I was a kid, and so I'd say like my monster from my youth were trees. Like, you know, I'd be outside and you just imagine like they're witches or monsters or something creepy with the branches, and I was a little scared of that.
Yeah, of
I
course.
love the idea of a witch tree. I just gotta say, I'm like, oh, yeah,
the long fingers scratching at the windows.
I feel like that's
Whispering
like
in the
such
woods.
classic like fairy tale, folk tale, like stay away from the woods, the bad creepy things are there.
Yeah, but it also tells you like not to go back and question your parents' stories because they don't really make that much sense when you hold them up.
Strings in
Well,
the hat.
and actually that once we hear from Brigid's monster, I would like to talk about that a little bit, right? What makes a monster? And of course it's the story, it's the string, but there's more to it. So Brigid, launch us with your monster.
Yeah,
and then
I
we'll
mean,
get back
I
to
feel
you.
like my monster is less, filled with parental mischief as yours. But I remember when I was very little, my mom was big into having me memorize fairy tales or like nursery rhymes. And there was one that I loved and was obsessed with and would just like repeat over and over again. It was like this old woman tossed up in a basket and she would like go into the sky and like sweep out these cobwebs. And like, I was like, oh, what a nice witch. Like, she's just cleaning the sky. Like how kind of her to do this. And then I went back and like reread it as an adult and I realized I don't think she's a witch. I think she's just an old lady. Like, who's holding a broom. But as a kid, I was like, old lady with a broom equals witch.
Yeah, of course.
But she was delightful. Hardly a monster at all.
Yeah, what a nice old lady.
So I guess how do we define monster, right? Because not the things we've talked about obviously have the spooky elements, but even reading your books, each of you has a monster in your book, but it's not maybe necessarily the traditional monster. The criaturas, I think, kind of are, but they don't always have to be the monster vision. So Jorge, you launch us this time. What do you define as monster?
I think a monster always has a little bit of whiff of death, like they're gonna kill you or immobilize you or do something. So I feel like the monster package is death and destruction. Like, they're out to do you harm and either, mess with you or cause some sort of massive destruction to your life.
I'm sorry, I just heard my camera is.
Oh. Well, your audio is working great.
Okay,
so we hear
perfect.
you perfectly fine. But Jorge, I have to say, I disagree. I don't. I always look at monsters as misunderstood outsiders. I think that things are only as scary as like you give them power to be. That's why in Totally Psychic, my monsters are ghosts, and ghosts, they don't have to be that scary. They
Yep.
could just be like delightful little friends coming to visit. So they're just these quirky characters that add some mischief and drama to the life of my main character. Like starting food fights in a cafeteria. Barely monstrous. So I always felt like monsters, they just got bullied because they were different.
Aww.
That's why they're lashing out. They just need a friend.
But I feel like I have to disagree with your disagreement because
plot deepens.
I think it's both. And actually, in my book, which I'll talk about later, but there is a misunderstood monster. But the monster brings along the destruction and the massive upheaval stuff.
Yeah, hurt people. It's just
yes, there's that too.
I was actually going to say, I feel like I'm straddling both of y'all's definitions in mine.
Okay.
So I feel like, at least for me, a monster is something that both has a high level of danger involved in it somehow, as well as in like some level of it's difficult to understand. Because I was thinking that there's times, when someone pours in the milk into the cereal bowl, and then puts the cereal in, and you're like, you monster. Like, what are you doing? Who does that? But it's because you don't understand it. And obviously you're exaggerating, but at least I hope you are. But you're like, you're so baffled and confused that this person has like devolved to you for a moment.
Right.
But then there's moments like in CC, there's dark criaturas and there's animal criaturas, and they're both kind of treated like monsters by the people. They shapeshift, they're dangerous, but the dark criaturas are marked by like they are actively created to harass and torture and frighten people, whereas animal criaturas just kind of exist and are animal human shapeshifters. And so the definition of that changes by their behavior, because they are both of them are dangerous and hard to understand. But as you come to know some of them, they no longer feel as dangerous or hard to understand, and they become less monstrous. But sometimes the people in the story, because of how they behave, become more monstrous. So straddle in there.
I like that. And I want to add, Kaela, to that it's not only the behavior, it's also how people perceive them, right? And how that image shifts. And so you have a narrative of criaturas on the whole are monsters. And then it really depends on how others are defining you. So it's not just your performance to the world, but how you're viewed from the world, regardless of your performance.
Right. Because interpretation is a wild thing. Because you catch a glimpse of something and think the behavior is this, when that's not what's happening even. So,
right. So tell us about the monsters in your book. And Kaela, since you started, we'll kind of jump over to you and then maybe head over to Jorge. But so you've got your criaturas. Those are your monsters?
Yeah. Well, I actually like to argue. Okay. So one of my favorite things, this might seem weird. One of my favorite things when people write into me there's a commonality that I've seen where the characters, like the kids will tell me like, oh, I love, like, they'll tell me their favorite spooky monster in it, whether it's Coyote, or they're like, El Sombrero, it's so scary, he's awesome, or things like that. Right. And there's varying levels in the criaturas of animal shapeshifters, ghoulish creatures, and various levels of how scary or something they've done or wrong something they've done is. But all of them say that the person they hate the most is the dad in the story. And that's because he does something that is, he's a very unkind man, and he does something is like scary and bad. But I'm like, isn't that interesting that in a story that's filled with very frightening creatures, El Sombreron, El Cirbon, you have brujas and brujos, things like that, that the kids are like more scared of the human father because the things that he does makes him monstrous. So I would argue that there's multiple monsters in my book, you know, and they may not, some of them might be human.
I like that.
In our book, in Monster Locker, the monster in the very first book is going to be Coalique, which is an Aztec goddess. So I'm breaking a couple rules that I just said earlier, that monsters are death and destruction. Well, first of all, she's more of a goddess than a monster, and her destruction is misunderstood by the kid that summons her, because in Monster Locker, Pablo has this locker, but it's a portal to monster worlds, and every book will have a different monster world come out of the locker and into his middle school. And in our book, you know, he's Mexican American, and through Coalique, he learns a little bit about himself and his own identity and where he fits in his Midwestern town as a Latino. And also, he gets to kick some monster butt too, which is fun for kids.
Always.
I love you straddling the goddess thing too. It reminds me, in CC, I use the character from Aztec mythology, Tzitzimite, who is, of course, like treated simultaneously like this terrifying monster who's like normal person from the legs down and then a bone person from the legs up, like up. And she's simultaneously like this very terrifying, devouring, destructive force, and also treated like the protector of women and children and a sort of divine star kind of thing. So it's crazy how like you can have like, sometimes maybe it's power that's kind of spooky alone.
I mean, that protection thing is interesting too, because you can become monstrous by protecting something. Like in Monster Locker, Coalique is trying to protect the earth. She's the earth mother. And in this mythology, and she's seen that humans have destroyed the earth. So her solution, kind of like Thanos and his snapping his finger, is basically to get rid of the humans, turn them into animals. And I think it's about protecting the earth.
Yeah.
Well, and also there's the fact of nuance, right? That even the monsters are nuanced. Nothing is entirely good or evil, black or white. And that, I think in all of your stories, that is something that comes through in the quote unquote monsters that you've created. Brigid, tell us about your monster.
Yeah, I mean, so my monsters, my barely monstrous monsters, are spirits and ghosts. So my main character, Paloma, she channels she does these spirit readings for her classmates to help them in their healing journey by connecting them with loved ones and give them the chance to say things that maybe they didn't get a chance to say to these spirits before. And then there's also a cast of reoccurring ghostly characters that are almost more of like historical figures in the school and her home, that like they're not moved on, they're just there haunting, helping her in her day-to-day life. She becomes friends with one of the ghosts in her school, so they don't require any sort of summoning. And so she just has a lot of like interpersonal connections with these ghosts, except for the rowdy group that end up getting channeled by mistake when she opens the spirit portal, and then those guys have got to go. She's got to get them out. Too much.
It's a little much over there.
Yeah. You can only have so many ghosts. It's a little overwhelming.
I love that, because as you said, right, they don't require summoning, but our real life monsters never do. They're always there. They're always hanging out, even when we don't want them to. And then when we make the mistake of channeling the ones that we really shouldn't, we got to do exactly what your character does. You got to get them away, right? Yep.
Yeah.
So, Brigid, even though you're not writing monsters, monsters, cute monsters, sweet monsters, ghosty monsters. Why do we love writing about monsters?
I mean, I personally just love writing about worlds that slightly resemble our own, but have a pinch of the supernatural.
Yep.
I think it makes things like a little more magical and special in that way, where it's a way to escape. That's just enough without having to dive into full world building or
Mm-hmm.
fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you're just leaning into just a little special version of the world we live in today. And I think that could be fun.
Yep. Kaela, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I really like writing about monsters because I don't know, I like things that reek of the primal or the primordial or the thing you don't quite understand. Like I've told people all the time, one of my favorite things when I was younger, it's really hard to do now, is like when there was like cable TV and satellite TV and stuff more commonly, is turn on the TV and you're in the middle of like a show, you don't know what the heck's happening. I loved that. I loved being like trying to figure out what was happening, what was going on, like what the relationships were, because I just dove into something I don't understand. I've always enjoyed that, and that's what I think is most enticing to me about writing monsters. Is it's a really great way. Actually, there's this thing in psychology called projection, right? Where you're like yell at somebody about something you're actually mad at yourself about. I feel like that's what monsters are. Is that like it's a way of taking things about human beings or yourself or things that you're uncomfortable with in our natures and projecting it out so you can look at it better and see what it really is, and as you try to wrestle and understand it. I think that's what the appeal is to me anyway.
I love that. I want to sit with that for a minute because I think you're onto something really important. Storytelling at large, but also storytelling when we're talking about monsters. And I love that idea of you're taking out the fear or the thing, the uncertainty, the confusion, the destruction, all the things that we've been talking about. You're putting it out there so that you can face it, so that you can actually see what it looks like. You're taking it out of the shadows. You're giving it a name, you're giving it a face, and then you're giving yourself a coping mechanism so that then you can attack it in whatever way you have to. And I think that's a very powerful thing that storytellers do.
Yeah.
To enable readers to be able to channel, as it were, your monsters to face these fears.
Yeah. Whether they're ghosts or criaturas or powerful goddesses who are mad,
Yeah.
Or like when a monster calls, like that's a great example of that as well. Making it a literal monster.
I like the idea of the projection because I think that overlaps with the way I look at monsters, which is like in Monster Locker, Pablo's out of balance because he doesn't have balance in his life or his identity. And then Coelique comes to restore balance to Earth by getting rid of humans. But it's sort of like by facing a monster that's trying to do what he needs to do, but in a different way, it sort of reveals a little bit of Pablo, not a little bit, a lot. That's the point of the book. So a lot of Pablo's character. And that's the great thing about monsters is that, you're always rooting for the hero, but what better way to just test the mettle of a hero than to put them against a monster who, is dealing with some of the same issues that they are, but in a very different tactic.
Yeah.
Ooh, yes. So it's like it's that relationship, right, between your protagonist and your antagonist, and both can be the same. It's just a different version of the thing of you that you're grappling with.
And
yeah, I mean, it's kind of like that. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry.
It's kind of like the Star Wars thing of, Luke Skywalker fighting Vader or fighting the Emperor, whatever. It's like picking a path, and you can see that future could be you. You could become the monster. Or you could pick your own path.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stay with you, Jorge, because I like how you brought up kind of the Aztec lore. And I'm curious to hear from all of you what influence you drew from for, legends or myths to create the monsters in your stories.
Well, I've always loved mythology and, legends and stories like that. And in my case, like growing up, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and in the 80s, you would basically spring break came and you go on a road trip to Florida, which is 20 hours of driving from Columbus, Ohio. And the only two people left awake would be me and my dad. My dad was driving. Obviously, I was too young to drive. And I would be bored, and he would just tell me myths, Greek myths. He would tell me about the Minotaur or Icarus flying too close to the sun, and he just like tell me myths, and I really just loved them. And then I fell in love with comic books, and that's a different kind of mythology. And then when we started working on Monster Locker Book 1, I had an idea for an Aztec monster, but my partner, who is Mexican American, knew a lot more about that than I did. And together we kind of dove in deep and did a lot of research, and some of this stuff I was familiar with and some of it was new to me, and it was just so much fun to to dive into those. They're like extreme drama, all the mythologies. It's total drama.
Telenovelas writ large.
It is. It is. It is very telenovela.
Yeah. Kaela, were you going to say something? I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no. I was just agreeing. Telenovelas.
Yeah.
The original.
So how about you two, Brigid, Kaela? What role does mythology and legends play in your stories?
Yeah, I feel like for ghost stories in particular, I love the oral storytelling of them. And I grew up in a family where we're all believers in ghosts here. And I had an aunt that she was always sharing these like fantastical ghost stories with me growing up. And I thought that was like the most incredible thing I'd ever heard. Like, oh my gosh, like, you have this like antenna to the other side, like that's wild. And I would just be captivated like listening to these things. And for Totally Psychic, I did a lot of research on the spiritualist movement. It was like the early 20th century, and how there was just like this overwhelming crowd of folks that were turning to mediums for answers. And there were so many mediums that they all kind of developed their own little shtick to like differentiate themselves from each other. And there was one in particular that I was researching named Josie Stewart, and she was this flower medium, and she would take these flower petals and like put them in between two pieces of paper, and when she would open it, there would be writing from the other side on the paper in whatever color petal the flowers were in. And I thought, how cool of a concept of that is for a medium to utilize flowers in that way. So I tried to incorporate that a bit in Totally Psychic. So Paloma and her family members, beyond just being able to see and speak to ghosts, they each have this like unique specialty where Paloma, for example, she is a flower medium, but when she gets overwhelmed or when like the situation is getting really stressful, she sees these flowers appear like floating around somebody, and every flower has like a specific meaning behind it. So she has this book of flowers that her abuela gave to her that she has to use to interpret like what's going on, why am I seeing these, and it helps her to solve some of the problems happening in her school.
So you preempted one of the questions I was going to ask you. So that's where you got your idea for the flower premonitions in your book. Yes. Yeah. Very cool. Okay. Sorry, Kaela. What about you? Legends, myths. As I read your book, I spotted a whole bunch of ancient lore. So I know there was definitely some influence there. Tell us more.
Yes. Okay. So, I mean, I've always loved myths and legends. I grew up reading the Celtic ones that my mom's from England. So all of my family in England sent over bunches of like fairy books and stuff. Grew up with those. It was a little harder to find Mexican legends growing up, but that's slowly getting better, which is lovely. But yeah, what happened was just like I've been exploring this fantastical thought of like, what if our souls were on the outside of our bodies? Because I love sort of like crazy premises like that feels mythological almost in and of itself, like Pandora's box, or the concept of the soul on the outside of the body. Love that idea. And I hadn't been able to pick a book for it, until I, was like hanging out with my abuelo and he was telling me all these stories. And the story with La Llorona that I shared earlier, I was like, what? I love that. And he told me more about how he met a bruja and a curandera and like these different things. And I was like, this is great. So I went in just this binge of like studying and researching all of these different Mexican, particularly leyendas and stuff like that, but also all of Latin America and the different fascinating versions of stories and how La Llorona like evolved from this other story and like the different ways that whatever we're going through as people sort of ends up in our legends because we're contemplating things together.
Sure.
And I loved that. So I wanted a way to just explore as many of those as possible in my book. I just was so excited. So I just stuffed it. With my own interpretations, but I was like,
we're going to put that in there. We're going to put that in there.
Pack it in, so I put coyote from Aztec lore in there. I put shapeshifters generally because that's a very common like trope throughout Latin American tales and most mythology. I put El Cirbón, I put El Sombreron. I made El Sombreron significantly scarier than he is, but I also wanted to lean into some of the themes of his spooky sides more, and that's why. So I was like, I'm gonna make him 9 feet though. He's gonna be 9 feet tall because that's scarier than being tiny. And Chichimite, I wanted to have that nice mestizo, that mix, as well, because the more I studied, the more I was like, look at how Venezuela's story is bleeding into Mexico. Look at how Southwest America is relating with Mexico. Like, look at how all this, and I wanted it to feel like the stories represent Mexico, and Mexican Americans and the experience. So yeah, I was just like picking everything I liked and anything that enhanced what I thought. Anything that leaned into and enhanced the overall themes of Cece of like how we treat each other. So any of those stories, like Tzitzimito being this mixture of, that we talked about earlier, of like somebody who is simultaneously dangerous and yet a protector and yet still dangerous, and characters who are misunderstood by perception just because they have the capacity for danger, or characters who are just straight up scary and bad because they choose to be bad. So that's how I went about it.
Sorry.
No, Jorge, go on.
I was saying the mythology thing. The other thing I've been thinking about with it recently is I have a teenage son, and I'm the dungeon master for his D&D game.
That's incredible.
Okay, that is amazing.
It's a lot of work, but it's fun. But I find myself like looking for monsters and reading all this D&D stuff, and it's like, the night before a game, it's like studying for a final. But sometimes I wonder if like that is the new mythology for kids, or like gaming, or like what was Greek myths to me growing up, or just mythology in general, if it's now like games like D&D, or if it's like the video games Elden Ring, or whatever those games are that my kids play now. Yeah, they were. I mean, like world building is such a big thing in our storytelling these days.
Well, and arguably the mythology has always been the game, right? The big capital G game. And it's always been reality. So it's the story we tell so that we can make sense of our reality, but it's still familiar elements. So Brigid, you mentioned like the bruja, the curandera, the ghosts, and I grew up in a house that I am positive was haunted. And even to the day, my dad refuses to accept the truth. I designed the house, I built it. I'm like, and it's haunted.
Yeah.
I'm sure we had chanekes, these mischievous sprites that would steal stuff and hide it and protect our nature. And my dad had premonitory dreams. So he would dream things, write them down, and then they would happen a month or two later. And he would show us how he wrote it down.
And he was still a skeptic, and he still didn't think your house was haunted. Like the evidence is clear.
Exactly. His sister like talked to a ghost, like this was just part of my Sunday dinners. They would be like, so what ghost did you talk to today? Right. It was just part of our life.
I love
and
that.
We grew up with this. So I feel like I grew up with myths and reality intertwined. I mean, that is just, it's the story you tell. Sometimes the story actually, I'm going to back up and say it this way. There's this great quote, "Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story." I actually prefer "don't let the facts get in the way of a good story," because sometimes the story is also the myth, right? It's the truth that we tell can be factual, and it can also be the ghosts and these other things that are happening, that it's how we're explaining the world around us. It's the relationship we're building with the world around us and with the people around us. So in a way, myths and legends are just as real as the desk we're sitting at and the people that we're talking to. They're incorporated into the reality that we walk around in. So of course it's a natural segue to put those on a piece of paper.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I even incorporate in my second book, which comes out next summer, that the majority of hauntings are due to ghosts being upset with home remodeling that they don't approve of. They just
Exactly.
they don't like the wallpaper you put up, so they're going to cause a fuss about it.
Right. Yes.
Nobody asked me what I wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
Remodel.
They want to be included.
Jorge, were you going to say something?
No,
Okay.
I covered it.
All right.
Thanks.
So I have a couple individual questions for you that I'll shoot out, and then we'll try to do some more group questions. So I'll start with Jorge since I picked on you anyway. So tell us a little bit about how Monster Locker evolved from your first pitch to the agent to where it ended up.
My first pitch to my agent was a kid in middle school has a locker that whenever he opens it, different themed monsters would jump out and attack him, and they'd have fights. So there'd be a book with Aztec monsters, there'd be Greek monsters, there'd be alien monsters, there'd be all these different groups of different monsters. Then she paired me with Andres Vera Martinez, who's the artist, and the three of us were talking about how we could tell a deeper story and bring in people's cultural identities into the monsters. And I really liked it, and it was a much harder story to tell in a better story. So in book one, it's Pablo ends up meeting this Aztec goddess, and it's sort of a journey with him and his Latinidad kind of.
Mm-hmm.
And in future books, it'll be like the main character, one of Pablo's friends who fights monsters with him, is half Japanese, half Jewish, and so he'll face there's a little bit of spoiler, but he'll face two monsters, like a kitsune, which is a Japanese seven-tailed fox from their folklore, and a golem, which is popular in Jewish folklore. And it's also a story about identity. So these books began as just like a romp, like let's just fight some monsters, to something much, much deeper. And that's because my agent and the artist, Andres, pushed me. And I mean, they didn't have to push that hard, but they planned the idea that this could be bigger than just a locker, the story-wise.
So follow-up question. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you work with the illustrator. How do you do, because it's your idea that you bring to the table, but obviously that is not necessarily how it ends up, right? It's a collaboration. So how does that do? How does an author collaborate with an illustrator?
In my case, I've been paired with artists. I've worked with two different artists, and I've been paired with artists that are super collaborative, and I'm collaborative. I come from animation where it's a lot of people with their fingers in the pie, a lot of stakeholders who have opinions about how the story should be told. And then in book publishing, it's a much smaller group, but I do like collaborating. So there's a lot of conversations, and there's a lot of, usually with Andres, he'll be like, well, what if we did this? What if we did that? What if, and I think about all those ideas, and he takes me to places I wouldn't go normally. Like I kind of look at it like, as a writer in graphic novels, you're building the airplane, but it's the artist who knows how to make the airplane fly and do loop-de-loops with the airplane and do tricks and stuff. And I think it's like it works best when it's a collaboration. Like I wouldn't just want to write a script for an artist and say, draw this. I want them to feel invested, and I want them to feel like, because drawing a book is no small feat. I don't have to draw these, but the illustrator lives for it with a long, long time. And I want them to feel ownership in the story, and I want them to make my version of my story better.
Right.
Or I guess it's our version of
Yeah.
my story better. And I think it only works if you have lots of conversations. And that's what I do. Just a lot of talking.
And this is a good time to tell all our schools and librarians and educators and students watching that even authors have to do a lot of revisions, and they have to do a lot of work rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. And I think we hear it here, right? It's because you want your story to be the very best story it can be. And sometimes that means it's not going to be the way you want it. It's going to be a collaboration between a whole bunch of people that know how to help you make that the best product.
I mean, and what you said is so true. Like I rewrite a lot, but I have no business lettering our books, but I letter them.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't have any artistic background. I'm not a technical person, but I just can't stop rewriting those lines. So I'm just like lettering every little balloon and just changing my dialogue to fit inside the balloon because I have a better line for something, or I have an idea, or it feels like it's almost like doing a haiku in a little bubble, and I just have to change every line. I would still be writing Monster Locker 1 if I didn't have to turn it in.
I
I'd just still be tweaking.
fully agree with that. It's like I feel like you could just revise it forever, like forever and ever and ever,
Mhm.
and they just have to like take it away from you at some point and be like,
Yeah.
"This it's you got it," you know.
I love deadlines. Deadlines are like the writer's best friend, or else
Yeah,
I'd still be like,
you'll push up against it every time. You will take the full deadline. Like at least for like I'm speaking generally, but like for me, I'm like I will use the entire deadline 100% of the time. Like there's no turning it in early. I will change everything.
So Brigid, did your story end up similar to how it started?
No, not at all. So I would say similar to Jorge's comments about collaboration. This was fully a collaborative process 100% of the way. So I had the unique opportunity to work with Cake Creative. And when I had submitted a writing sample to them, it was about a girl who had a relationship with a grandma character, and there was a spirit world involved. And based on that, Danielle Clayton, she had this concept for a teen psychic book, and there was a general plot idea, and we collaborated on it, and I provided my thoughts and my research on the spiritualist movement, where I thought it could go. And just the whole Cake team in general was incredible, with just letting me roll with it. And obviously there was a lot of back and forths along the way, but it really felt like there's a lot of cooks in this kitchen. We're making something great, and like making a delicious book at the end of it. And I just had a fun time. Like I feel like working with others is just like the best, because you as an individual, you could have so many ideas, you could outline and come up with concepts, and then when suggestions are like, I don't know, I feel like the best things come out of conversation when like you give a suggestion, they give a suggestion, and then the end product is like a beautiful combination of everyone's input. And I think it's just a really special experience. And I think as an author, it could be a very lonely process, a very solitary process, where you're kind of alone with your thoughts, your ideas, your book, you're writing by yourself. But then when you have a team with like an editor and your agent, and you're submitting it and having these dialogues, and they're able to come back to you with like their thoughts and insights, it's less lonely. It feels nice to collaborate. So,
which is not to say there aren't tears along the way, at least on my end. It is so, when I get those editor letters, and I just have to embrace myself, because my editor's wonderful. She's always right 100% of the time. And I read them and I'm like, no, because I spend so much time making those edits, and I know I'm in for like rolling up your sleeves. But you're right. Like sometimes
they're long. Sometimes the edit letters are long.
Yes.
But what do you do? I'm just curious, like, what do you do if you like in my collaboration, if I don't agree with
Yeah.
a note I get, well, if I get it from the editor, they're always right. But if I'm talking to Andres and I have a different vision for something, I find that I have to keep reminding myself why I'm telling the story to be able to articulate to
Yep.
him why I want to do something a
Mm.
particular way. Like, do you find that in your situation too?
Well, and I think that's really important because you need to be able to hear feedback broadly from people,
Yeah.
but also be able to stay true to the truth you're trying to tell, right? And so to have that inner compass that says, okay, does this help me tell the story I want to tell? Because sometimes people give us feedback to change the story into something they would like to read, but that's
Mhm.
not always right. That's not always the story we want to tell. So I feel like part of
Yeah.
it is having that compass and knowing how to stay true to it while also expanding your ability to get feedback and respond to it.
Yes, I've been an editor for close to 10 years, and something that I often told my writers was not in the publishing world, for the record, but something I often told my writers was like, "Listen, editors are usually right about the problems, like,
You're not
but
biased.
we're
or
not
anything.
usually."
Yeah,
It's like,
they always are.
but we're not always right about how to do
Mm,
it. You know,
that's a
like
good point.
if I'm telling you this character and I think you should do this and stuff like that, you know, like I've had it told me plenty where they're like, I think this is a problem and because blah, 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 and you should do this. And I'm like, that if I did that, it would completely change what I'm trying to accomplish. And that's not what I want to do. It's like,
Mhm.
but what you're telling me is that what I want to come across is not coming across. So I need to find a way to make sure you understand what kind of story
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell then as well. So
That's
that's
a
my
great
favorite way
And
of going about
sometimes
it.
they see things that like you don't see, and then you feel like wildly smart afterwards.
Yes.
Where they're like, wow, like I love how the flower premonitions were like a manifestation of her anxiety. And I was
You're
like,
like,
yeah,
yes.
that's correct.
It was on purpose.
Kayla, the thing you said about the notes reminds me of, and in kids animation, you get a ton of notes from a lot of different people, and sometimes they give a suggestion that doesn't work, and I always try to look for the note behind the note. Is the way I talk about it.
Yeah.
It's like there's usually a reason, but it is a bigger note, but it's just the wrong direction.
Yeah, I love that. The note behind the note where you're like, okay,
Mhm.
well, why are you saying that that's a problem though?
Yeah.
Because
What is your
that's what I need
problem?
to solve. Yeah, what's your
Yeah.
problem?
I feel like I usually ask for like a call or a discussion if there's like a note that I'm like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. Let's chat it out. Let's like see where you're coming from, where I'm coming from, and like find that middle ground that works
Trying
for
to
everybody.
Vulcan mind meld with them and be like,
Yeah.
why?
I'm
Why
always
really?
I'm always a fan of being like, let's just hop on a call, save some
Figure it
emails.
out.
Yeah.
So I had a question for Caleb, but I actually am curious. I'm going to toss it to all of you because I want to see what you all have to say about this. Do you write any of your characters inspired by people you know in real life?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's hear it.
Like every single one of them. You know, you go first.
Yeah, I was just gonna say a lot of them, I think. But the thing is, a lot of people are like, "Is this me in the book?"
Yeah.
Like, or like, "Is this you?" and things like
Mhm.
that. And I'm like, no, none of them are singularly a person that I know. You know what I mean? But like, I might create a character to explore this one really interesting facet of somebody I know and love, and I blow that up into a person in order to explore it. And I do the same thing with myself. Like there's several characters in CC that are all different versions of me. They're just exploring one facet more predominantly, and then fleshed out, of course.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's like pulling like elements from a person. Like in Totally Psychic, Paloma has a mischievous younger sister. Do I also have a mischievous younger sister? Yes, I do. Did the character in the book release crickets upon her church choir's basement? Yes. Did my sister actually do such a thing? I will never tell, but perhaps.
You could prove nothing.
So I'd be like, you always draw from real life, but
It's always like a mix and match for me. Like, if people are made up of like 20 different traits, I just borrow whichever trait makes sense for that character. Like in My dad was a big Francophile for some reason, a Colombian American in Columbus, Ohio, who loved anything Frenchy, French food, French movies, French music. And so I borrowed that for the dad and Call Me Iggy. Is the dad and Call Me Iggy my dad?
Mhm.
I don't think so, but I borrowed a lot.
So I have two anecdotes. One, so Lola, which is the book that just came out this year, is actually based in my childhood home. And I put a lot in there that, you know, she grows up in a house that was built around a tree, and that's my house. And I have the chaneques and the sandbox, and the story itself is inspired by a real event that happened to me when I was a young girl. So there's a lot of truth in there. But I was very careful when I wrote it about not leaning into my family, because I didn't want them to think I was telling the story of them. So then, of course, as my mom is reading it, she pauses and she's like, "Oh, this sounds exactly like me," referring to the mom. And I totally would have said that. I'm like, "No, Mom, this is not about you. I promise you, there's no part of this that is you or my dad." And I had that in mind. I wrote a series called Legendarios. And it's these twins, and they moved from Mexico to the US. And I deliberately switched around the parents. So my mom is American in real life. My dad is Mexican. In the book, I had the dad be the American, and, you know, sort of switch it around, give them different personalities, because without fail, my family members will always think that I am secretly telling the story of them. They'll choose a character and say, "I know this is me."
Yeah.
It is, isn't it? And you're like,
it's hard because you have to, you know, hurt your characters and put them through the ringer, and, you know, sometimes kill them off. And I'm like, I don't want to do that to you. This really isn't you.
You tell them it's for love, that I'm not
Exactly.
making this you.
Exactly. So I think we have a couple questions that have come in from students. So we're going to get those pop up here. I don't know what they'll be, so you guys might be in for some surprises.
Ooh,
All right. So how do you pick an idea from all the ideas in your head? Does someone want to take a stab at that? And thank you, Federico from Pleasantville, for submitting that.
Yes. Can I jump in on that first?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I don't pick one. I pick all of them.
You put all the criaturas in there.
I put all of them into one thing. Actually, what it is like my brain has many, many ideas. And what I do is I start herding them into sort of piles, like you do when you're cleaning your room, you know, and you're like, we'll see where these go. And I will do that until they start to amalgamate anything that are related to each other into one larger novel. Because I will get bored in my own novels if I don't do things like that, where I like everything in it to a high degree, because then I will stay and I will write the whole thing.
Yeah.
So that's how I do that.
I'm with you on it. Like, I like to everything. So I have a document of like all my brainstorm ideas, and I'll flesh out one, I'll outline it, I'll work on it, I'll work on a chapter, and then I'll get a little tired of that one. I'll switch over to the other. So I usually have like 2 or 3 projects that I'm working on at any given time. And even when I like originally was like soliciting my work and like submitting it to agents and everything, I would send it out and I would get all the no's, no, we don't want it. And then I'd be like, oh, well, now I feel very sad and discouraged about this one, but thank goodness I have 10 other ones to work on. And then I would like work on like another one and get like really happy about it and like start submitting that one. And just that process repeats over and over again. It's a numbers game. And then eventually someone will want something. So
I mean, Federico, my approach is kind of a combination of both Brigid and Kaela. Like, one, I do have a document with all my ideas. And sometimes there's one idea that I'm obsessed with that I just keep going back to and back to.
Yeah.
Then there's also like a practical thing too, where I will talk with my book agent or my TV agent, and I'll be like, I have an idea for this, idea for this, idea for this. What do you think I'd have the best chance of turning into a book? And I'll usually, and it's a practical approach too, because I like them all equally, and I'll just throw my weight behind one idea and develop it and see if somebody else agrees that we can turn it into a book.
it's a very organized approach.
I love that. I wish I was that organized.
I know. I was like, maybe listen to that approach. That's the.
We should do that.
It's the only part of my life I'm organized in. Everything else is a mess.
Well, you guys, sadly, and if you can believe it, we're coming up on the hour. So I want to take a couple minutes and give you a chance to share with everybody who has joined us today where they can find your books, how they can connect with you on social media or in the world. Jorge, since you're at the top of my screen, I will have you kick us off.
Well, these are my books, and you can get them wherever you get books, and wherever you get or borrow books, you can find them, and library, that sort of thing, or your local indie bookseller, or wherever you go. And you can find me. I'm pretty easy to find. There's not a lot of Jorge Aguirre's, except there's a baseball player, I think, who's Jorge Aguirre, but I'm not
That's
him.
your alter ego?
So that's my alter ego. But no, if you go on Instagram and just go to Male Jorge, you can find me, or Threads. I'm on Instagram, Threads, and this is the best place to find me. And if you read my work and want to let me know what you think, just tag me. Although if you really hate it, don't tag me. You can tell. You can still tell me about it.
So what I guess I'll add one more question for you. Are you working on anything in the future that we can get excited about?
I'm working on a sequel to both these books.
Awesome.
So this is going to have a part 2, and this is going to have a part 2.
Fabulous. All right, Brigid, you're up.
Okay, so Totally Psychic, also available wherever books are available. And I know, indies are always our favorite darlings, and we love to support a local indie. It's also available at the big guys, like the Amazons and the Target, Walmart.coms, but indies are like, indies are cute.
Love.
Yeah, indies are cuter, you want to go there. And libraries also. But for future projects, there is a book 2 to this coming out next summer, which I just submitted the manuscript for a couple weeks ago. So
awesome! Yes,
it finally released from my revising over and over again. And I have a couple of licensed publishing titles like SpongeBob Meme Pants.
Oh,
it is just a book of memes. And then you can write your own meme on the other side. But this one is, the fun one.
Anyway. Oh, it's the real stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I am, sorry, I keep this mirrored. This one over here, there's a little line here of the Cece Rios trilogy, Cece Rios in the Desert of Souls, Cece Rios and the King of Fears, and Cece Rios and the Queen of Brujas, which is the latest one that came out this year. I also have done a book with Lego, the Lego Dreams, a story of dream chasers and the riddle spokens, where there's more cool legendary creatures I stuffed in there because I like them. Yeah. And I would highly recommend you go to my website. It's just my name.com and subscribe to my email newsletter, because I do giveaways for my books, but exclusively for my newsletter subscribers. So
great.
This one will be the giveaway soon. So
hey. Well, thank you guys so much. And thank you to everybody who joined us. I think that's a wrap for us. So happy Latinx Kidlit Book Festival 2024.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.